fight fans, to another episode of BTR Boxing Podcast Career Profiles, and today's episode is voted for by the users of Twitter, the listeners of the podcast. You voted for Joe Calzaghe's career profile, and it was in and amongst some of the greatest fighters of all time, and very surprising that it actually won. It was in there with Marvin Hagler, Pernell Whitaker and Manny Pacquiao as the greatest left-handers, so really surprised this actually came out on top, and Johnston was also very surprised that this one came out on top as well. So before we get into this episode, as always, go and find us on social media and follow us on Twitter at BTR Boxing Pod and on Facebook at BTR Boxing Podcast. Also, subscribe to the podcast by finding us on Apple Podcasts, BTR Boxing Podcast in the search bar. You can find us on Spotify, you can find us on Podbean, Stitcher, Spreaker, Player FM. If you are a YouTube user, you can go and look for Eat Sleep Boxing Repeats YouTube channel, subscribe, and we will get all the latest episodes uploaded on there for you to listen to via YouTube if you wish to do so. So then, as voted for by you, the followers of Twitter, the users of Facebook, the listeners of BTR Boxing Podcast, this is the career profile of the Welsh wizard, Joe Calzaghe.
Joe Calzaghe.
So here we go, as voted for by you, the users of Twitter, the listeners of BTR Boxing Podcast. This is the career profile of Joe Calzaghe, and it won off the back of an absolutely fantastic poll put out by yourself, Johnston, about some of the greatest left-handers. So this was actually in a poll including Manny Pacquiao, Pernell Whitaker and Marvin Hagler, and it actually went really close with Marvin Hagler, and Joe Calzaghe came out on top.
Yeah, surprisingly, he was actually my fourth choice. For all the, I do like Joe Calzaghe. I always had, for me, Hagler was the best southpaw that's ever lived. Pernell, Manny, pretty close. But Joe, end of the day, look, people voted. Loads of people voted as well, over 200, and that was good. It was good to get good response, and obviously Calzaghe come out on top. So obviously. A lot of Welsh people listen to the show then, Sean.
Yeah, no, actually, there is a lot of Welsh people. There's a lot of guys that have spoke about some of the Welsh fighters we've had on for the Ones to Watch series. So actually, this will be a really good one for them. And we've also had Barry Jones on for the Life and Times of. So yeah, I'm pretty sure the Welsh fans will be happy with this particular one. One of the greatest Welsh fighters to have ever graced the squared circle. We'll be covering his career off, and we're going to be covering off his early days, his amateur experiences. We're going to be covering off his professional career, of course, where it started, where the significant breakout was, some of the most defining fights of his career, which we'll touch on briefly, and obviously the sort of aftermath of him retiring and what sort of legacy he's left in the sport. So let's get into it then, and let's talk about Calzaghe as early days then. Talk about where he was actually born. Something I didn't know about Calzaghe, and something I automatically always assumed about him throughout his career, was that he was straight from Wales. Actually, he was born in Hammersmith in London, and I never knew that until I was doing the research for this one.
His dad, wasn't it? His father, let me see if I can get his first name here. Pietro Vincenzo Calzaghe, obviously a.k.a. Enzo, was actually born in that beautiful Italian island, Sardinia. He was actually, I don't go too much on Enzo, but he loved his music, didn't he? So he was actually, him and his brothers were backing, they basically backed a few groups, Buck Spears and Adam and the Ants and Paul Young. So, he loved music, and then obviously they were going sort of back and forth between the UK and Sardinia, and then obviously they met Joe Calzaghe's mother, Jackie, and they ended up in London, and obviously that's where he was born in Hammersmith, but he was only there apparently for a few months, and then they moved to the south of Wales, and that was where he basically stayed for the rest of his life. But he never lost. The rest of his life still today, actually. He never really wanted to leave. He did sort of go back and forth between Sardinia with his dad, but and he always kept that Italian, sort of the Italian dragon. That's where that all come from. But yeah, going back through sort of Joe's career, I never knew he was born in Hammersmith until we was looking at the profile.
No, it was something I'd never really sort of looked into, if I'm being totally honest with you. And I have actually sat down and watched documentaries on Joe, and the one that they brought out a couple of years ago, I watched that, and I failed to actually remember this fact as well. So it was quite interesting to really refresh my memory on the fact that he actually wasn't born in Wales, but he was born in Hammersmith and moved to Wales around about the age of 2 with his family. And obviously, as growing up, and you hear all the various interviews from Joe himself about his early childhood, he's actually naturally a shy person growing up, and one of the things significant that I remember from interviews from him was that he was actually bullied a lot at school growing up, and it was something that I was really surprised to hear about when listening to him speak about it, because you think of Joe Calzaghe as he was in the ring, and you know, when he retired, he seemed full of confidence, you know, he seemed a guy like knew where he was, but I suppose that was all the years of boxing and the discipline that boxing had taught him in his career, and it made him into the man we know him as today. But it was really sort of sad to hear some of the stories of him growing up in school, and eventually, you know, he goes to the boxing gym and starts boxing, and he was boxing from the age of 9, and it's quite common. A lot of people do box from an early age, and especially when they've got someone who's really keen on boxing and mad on boxing, like his dad was, Enzo. You know, he was really wanted him to be a part of a boxing, and that was something that when you watch back and you read through and you look at all the research on Joe Calzaghe's career, it was just, again, I always speak about this, it's like destiny, it's like fate, and it always seemed to be the way with the Calzaghes, that they was always going to end up in boxing come hell or high water. But his amateur career, he actually had about 120 amateur contests, and he won 4 schoolboy ABA titles, followed by 3 consecutive senior British ABA titles between 1990 and 1993, and reportedly had an amateur record of 112 wins against only 10 losses.
Yeah, he had a decent amateur career, Joe, didn't he? And he always, in sort of the 2 interviews I've watched recently, he always mentions his first ever amateur fight that he lost, and he still says to this day that, you know, it was pretty suspect considering that the referee was the other kid's dad. So that's what he put it down to, the fact why he lost that, his first ever amateur fight. But you know, he was a keen footballer as well. He's always mentioned that he really wanted to play football. That was his real first love. And then, but obviously, just as you say, it was just something in the blood. He just had disability. He had those fast downs from an early age, and he was, you know, something that people fail to sort of don't really realise or you associate with Joe Calzaghe. He had punching power back then. He was putting people away in the first round in his amateur competitions, and then. You know, ideally he wanted to go to the Olympics over in Barcelona for the 92 Olympics, but unfortunately it was Robin Reed that actually edged Calzaghe out of the Olympics. So in 1993, that was when he decided to turn pro, and he had his first fight in Cardiff on the Lennox Lewis Frank Bruno bill.
He's thrown everything.
Oh, he's got him again with the right hand. It's the second count of the round. He's been told to get to a neutral corner, and how much more of this will Hanlon be able to take? He's up at 8, he's brave, and the referee's taking a look at him and saying no more. It's a first round win on his debut for Joe Calzaghe from Newbridge in Gwent. The Welsh fans like this, they like the look of this 21-year-old who was an ABA champion at welterweight, light middleweight and middleweight, and well, he did nothing wrong there.
I know, what a start to your professional career on a fight of that magnitude at that period of time as well. You know, people of this day and age, fighters of this day and age, get the opportunities to fight on some fantastic bills, but making your professional debut on a bill such as that, a big British domestic heavyweight showdown for a world title, nothing better than starting your career on that. And he actually beat Paul Hanlon in 1 round, who was a 23-fight veteran on his professional debut. So what a start to his professional career there. And as he moved on through his career earlier on, by September 1995, he'd won 13 out of 13 fights. And you got to look at his career earlier on. You know, he was blowing people out of the water, and you said, and you quite rightly pointed out, that he had some power back in his early days. This was well before he was having all the issues that he had with his hand and the sort of brittleness of his hands later on in his career. But he was firing people out in emphatic fashion. You know, you look at some of the early fights in his career. I mean, he's stopping guys. I think it was actually 7 in the first round and 2 in the second, and he's beating experienced fighters. You know, there were 2 American fighters on his resume, Frank Minton and Robert Curry. And you look at other fighters that he'd been in the ring with. He'd actually also been in with Bobby Joe Edwards, who is well known up here on the Manchester circuit. You know, he's well known. I've met Bobby. He's a pretty quirky guy, and sort of his claim to fame is fighting Joe Calzaghe, to be fair, in 1995. So, you know, he had some really, really good wins on his record there. And then we also had a win against Nick Manners in 1995. Again, another guy known well on the circuit up in this neck of the woods in the northwest sort of Lancashire region. You know, he's another guy well known for his training that he does these days. But I think his first big breakout, really, for me, looking back on his resume and looking back on his career, was when he fought for the vacant British super middleweight title against Stephen Wilson.
Yeah, I think that was the marquee sort of. He made his mark. It was an impressive, dominant display from Joe Calzaghe against Stephen Wilson. And no, if I remember, I think Stephen Wilson had only lost 1 fight. So, you know, it sort of coasted through Calzaghe. I think probably because he didn't make the Olympic team, and then obviously he decided to turn pro in '93. He sort of, you know, it was just that lack of exposure. So he pretty much sort of went through the ranks at, sort of as a relative unknown until obviously he met Stephen Wilson and won that British title. He obviously defended it against Guy Stanford, which was a first round knockout. And you know, what he did do well was that he put people away that were put in front of him. There wasn't any real big names that, you know, at the time as such. I mean, he was sort of on the coattails of obviously that fantastic sort of middleweight division with Collins and Ben, and obviously Eubank. So they were sort of coming to the end of it, and this was, you know, Calzaghe was this fresh kid working his way through. So sort of having a look sort of in the archives and sort of digging around to see if there were many British up-and-coming fighters. There wasn't really. And obviously then he beat Anthony Brooks as well in 2 rounds before the defence of the British title again against Mark Delaney, who Mark Delaney at the time was a puncher. He was a bit of a puncher and he was dangerous. And it was the first real fight and marquee fight for Calzaghe after the Wilson fight.
The difference, cancel out the arrears, yeah. He can bang with that.
That's the one that's given Delaney all the problems.
Yeah, when he puts them together with punches like that, and little salvos, Calzaghe, it won't take a lot for John Cole to step in.
See, he's standing off again, Reg. He's not getting involved, giving himself room to punch and wearing him down. I don't think Mr. Delaney has much left, Reg.
No, I said that the referee wouldn't take too long to stop it if he was really under fire for the whole of this round.
See, Delaney's had no success. That's the problem here. If you're taking punches but you're getting punches back home, you can let it go, but he's just shifting punishment.
I knew he would go in there, John Cole. He's right on the button there, and he saved this man. He couldn't go on like that. He's terribly marked up at the end there. Got all those bruises of battle. And a cocky, but what a confident defence there by Calzaghe anyway. And that seems to be the name of the game, doesn't it, these days? You've got a little bit of cockiness in there to draw some attention, and certainly the Welshman from one time, Hammersmith, could well become a big name in the fight game if he's not already, as it was entitled to be, as British super middleweight champion.
It certainly was, and obviously this was a big fight for him, defending the title against an undefeated fighter. And the way he went in there and dispatched of Mark Delaney within 5 rounds was really, really impressive, because at this stage of the career, going into the fight, Mark Delaney was 21 wins, 17 knockouts. Calzaghe was 16 wins, 15 knockouts. So it was a battle of who was going to get each other out first at this one. And it's crazy to think about this, because we know Calzaghe at the end of his career, how he had to adapt to fighting, how he had to adapt to getting the victories over the big marquee names at the end of his career because of the issues with his hands. But at this point of his career, you know, in 1996, he's not got all these issues with his hands, and he's able to go in there and sit down on his shots a lot more, and he was able to dispatch of Mark Delaney within 5 rounds in what was a great little scrap. And I think if you've not seen this one, it is available on YouTube to go and watch, and if you want to watch some of the early Calzaghe fights, this is definitely one of them to go and check out, because I really enjoyed watching this one back and looking back on how he made his major impact in his career. Because, being honest with you, I didn't really pick up on Joe Calzaghe as a fighter actually until the Chris Eubank fight, which we'll come to in a few minutes, because back then obviously there wasn't a lot of TV around in the UK to be able to pick up these fighters. You only really had ITV, who only had certain names on there because a certain promotion had the rights over that TV station, and you had Sky, and that was only if you was not poor enough to afford Sky in your house as well. So if you had a Sky subscription, you'd catch guys like Prince Naseem Hamed coming throughout his career, your Steve Collinses, your Robin Reeds, you know, you'd get to watch all these fighters coming up. Ryan Rhodes, another one, you know, these are guys that were always on Sky and always on the Sky shows. So Joe Calzaghe, when I first got to see him, was against Eubank, and before he got to Eubank, he then went on to fight 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more times before he ended up going in against Eubank, which actually, it's something that people may or may not remember about the lead up to the Eubank fight, was actually this was supposed to be Calzaghe versus Collins on the full Monty bill. Now that full Monty bill I do remember really, really well, clear as day, because I remember being so excited to watch it, because it was on the same day England played Italy, so it was billed as a double bill. You had England versus Italy, World Cup qualifier for 1998, and then straight after that you had the full Monty bill with the likes of Naseem Hamed and Ryan Rhodes on there in Sheffield, in what Ryan Rhodes described to me recently as one of his best nights and one of his, you know, most great atmospheres to be boxing on. So if you go and look on the internet, you can actually find the original posters for the full Monty promoting the fight with Steve Collins. Now Steve Collins actually went on to announce his retirement, so this fight wasn't going ahead with Steve Collins, and instead Chris Eubank, who again was coming towards the end of his career at this point, decided to take that step in, and was also then highly ranked at the time and was available to fight for the WBO super middleweight title.
Yeah, I'm with you. The first time I see Joe Calzaghe was obviously the Chris Eubank fight, and I do recall the night, and obviously I think that was the 0-0 in Rome as well, England Italy. I remember that quite well. I think they'd just beaten us sort of previously 1-0, moving away sort of from boxing there for a minute. But yeah, it was a great night of boxing as well. I mean just before that, there was one thing. There was a few things just before the Eubank fight as well. That he actually had 5 fights from February 1996 to May 1996, which actually averaged about every 19 days. That was Joe Calzaghe's little run there between those years, sort of against Pat Lawler and Mark Delaney, as we already spoke about. But then the other major thing was that he decided to leave Mickey Duff, and Mickey Duff was his sort of promoter at the time, and he looked after Joe, and Joe decided to leave. And then obviously he had the Tyler Hughes win and the Lucio Torres wins before the Eubank fight, which I think they were both on not Warren's card. It wasn't Warren's card. It was Eddie's dad, Barry Hearn. In the end, he signed with Frank Warren in the summer of 1997. Frank Warren was actually he was the man of Sky Sports at the time. Frank Warren, wasn't he? So, and as you say, you know, he could have fought Collins, and then obviously Collins decided to retire. But a great fight, the only fight with Chris Eubank, and I remember sort of thinking in my head that, you know, I weren't too sure. I didn't really know much about Joe Calzaghe. People were saying he's an up-and-coming fighter with fast hands, and I weren't too, you know, I thought maybe Eubank would do him. And with that first round, he got put down straight away with that left hand, and I was like, wow.
Untried, and let's go with the left hand straight away. Eubank I didn't know whether he might just try to catch Calzaghe cold.
Well, kælʻzēɡi is a very fast start at 10 first round win.
Oh, the left hand puts Eubank on the floor for only the 5th time in his career. What a start by kælʻzēɡi. He means business, all right, this Welshman.
Okay, so who is this kid? But Joe Calzaghe did actually come out with a great line. He said that the first meaningful shot I threw was the left hook in the first, and he went down. But then he got up and smiled, so I knew I was in for the toughest fight of my life. And that is bang on, because Eubank, you know, that guy had a granite chin, and it was a great performance from Joe Calzaghe. It really was that big fight that obviously he won a title, he won a WBO title. You know, we've just recently spoke about Yard with the WBO, and you know, this is Frank Warren all over. Another one of his fighters going for the WBO title, and it was a great performance from Joe Calzaghe. And even Eubank said after that fight, he said, now I know why everyone's ducking him.
Yeah, and I tell you what, like I said, that was the first time I'd really seen him. I'd seen highlights of him, but I'd never seen him in a full fight, and this was the first full fight I'd seen him involved in, against someone who I knew very well, which was Chris Eubank at the time. Obviously, he was still a big fan favourite at the time. Joe Calzaghe, obviously at this point in his career, was 21 fights in at the age of 25, and obviously for him, it was a massive breakout night for him, winning that world title for the first time, and being able to go on what was a fantastic run, which we'll talk about a little bit later on down the line with this WBO title. But from there on in there, 1998, he picked up 2 victories against Branko Sobot and Juan Carlos Gimenez, beating both of them to defend his titles in Cardiff, before we come on to another fight in his career which I felt was quite significant, and one which I, to this day, would say he was very, very lucky to win, and I think he got away with, when he beat Robin Reid via a split decision. Robin Reid, at this point of his career, you know, he was a former WBC super middleweight champion. He was still a massive name in the super middleweight division at this point, and it was billed as an absolutely cracking fight because Robin Reid had only had 1 loss on his record at this point. And you think back to Robin Reid's career and some of the fights he was involved in himself, guys like Vincenzo Nardelio and Henry Wharton in 97, before losing to Falani Malinga in a bit of a lackluster performance, losing that title, before then coming back in 99 and fighting Joe Calzaghe. He was 25-0 undefeated at the time when he fought Calzaghe. So this was a big fight and very controversial. And watching back on that fight again, and I will say it, and I know it's Joe Calzaghe's career profile, but I still do genuinely believe Robin Reid just edged that particular fight, and I felt like Calzaghe just got away with that one. And it's still something that is debated to this day about whether Robin Reid won that fight or whether Joe Calzaghe won that fight. But for me, this was a very significant fight because he overcame some adversity. There was some tense moments in the fight. Real good display from both men in the fight. What did you make of this one, and what do you actually believe was the right result in this particular fight?
The 12 tremendous rounds of boxing.
Are we ready for the scorecards yet? Is Mike good already? I think he is.
Judge Robert Bird scores the contest 116 to 111 in favour of Joe Calzaghe. Judge Paul Thomas scores the contest 116 to 111 in favour of Robin Reid. And John Duggan scores the contest 116 to 111 in favour of the winner, and still
Calzaghe wins it, and I cannot believe that the judges had it that wide either way.
Unbelievable that there was 5 rounds difference in all the judges.
And I think everybody watching it at ringside thought this is a really close fight. 2 judges thought that Calzaghe had won it by 5 points, and the other one thought that Reid had won by 5 points. And the one who thought Reid had won by 5 points was the British judge, Paul Thomas.
Oh, I thought it was a brilliant domestic tear-up. I really enjoyed the fight. I thought it was very close. I had it dead even, on sort of 5 rounds each going into the 11th and 12th, and I can't. It's so difficult to feel because those 2 rounds, those last 2 rounds, even the 10th, 11th, and 12th rounds were especially entertaining. I mean, they both went for broke and they both went for the win, which was great to see. I mean, You don't really see it that much, but they really went for it, and it was a brilliant domestic fight. I edged towards kal-ZAH-gee. That was me watching it the other night, but I can see why Reed would pick Reed. So I completely, it was a split decision for a reason. It really was tight. I mean, the fight itself, it was almost inevitable. I think for kal-ZAH-gee, he allowed Reed to get under his skin a little bit, because obviously he when we spoke about it, was potentially supposed to be Steve Collins instead of Chris Eubank, but obviously at the time Robin Reed had the WBC title, as you said. He had beat Vincenzo, hadn't he, Nardello. So he was he had his nose out of joint, because the fact that, hang on, why aren't you giving me a title shot? You know, you got a title, you could give me the title shot. Obviously he picked him in the Olympics as well, so there was always that. It was inevitable that eventually Frank was going to get these two in the ring together, and they didn't disappoint. It was an excellent fight. I thought kal-ZAH-gee did just edge it. I mean, he did mention the fact as well later on that he had the hand, you know, he had problems with his hands all the time, and it was roughly around this time. I think it was in the warm-up before, it sort of, look, I can't remember if it was a warm-up or if it was just a training beforehand, it's sparring maybe. He did hurt his hand, and then even had on what we thought Rick Thornbury and David Sparry after the two fights after this, actually contemplating and putting it because his hands were really giving him that much trouble, and he was beginning to get hindered by, and his training regime and schedule was taking its toll on him. So, but you know, obviously he carried on. But that, you know, this fight in particular was a real defining moment, because if he had have lost, you know, he wouldn't be the undefeated fight that we all know today.
Well, that's also true as well. On the same undercard of the Joe Calzaghe Robin Reed was Richie Woodall and Vincenzo Nardello. Richie Woodall had actually picked up the WPC version of the title by beating Thelani Malinga, who beat Robin Reed. So he went on. It was a bit of a strange one, really, because obviously, as we know in a few moments, these Calzaghe and Woodall ended up fighting each other, but obviously before that fight happened, you had him beating Malinga for the title, defending it against Glenn Catley, who was a great fighter in his own right, and Vincenzo Nardello, before losing it in late '99 to Marcus Bayer, who was another fantastic fighter coming out of Germany. So then we move on in Calzaghe's career at this point, and we get the fights, as you said, with a very underrated David Starry. He beat David Starry and Rick Thornbury, and he then went on to beat Omar Sheikha, and then this is where we get the Woodall fight. And obviously we've heard interviews with both men. They were actually quite, you know, pretty pally at this point in their own lives and outside of the ring. So I don't think it was too difficult, but I think they knew it was business. And obviously Joe Calzaghe went in there, did a little bit of a number, I felt, on Richie Woodall, eventually going into the later rounds of the fight. I think when I look back on this particular fight, Woodall gave him a few problems early on in the fight, and then I think as Calzaghe took over and started to land the more significant punches, I think that's when we started to see Woodall unfold a little bit. And this actually would be Woodall's last fight before he retired, and Joe Calzaghe went on to stop him in the 10th round, defending his WBO version of the title. So, and again, I wouldn't say it was a significant win for him, but it was a notable win for him on his record before moving on to the early 2000s. And at this point, he was only fighting what was being put in front of him, and it begs the question whether was there anybody else around at the time he could have gone in the ring with in the super middleweight division, because he does get a little bit of flack, Calzaghe, for some of the names he was going in with at the time. So, you know, around 2001, 2002, he was fighting guys like Mario Vite, who was 30, you know. He was fighting Will McIntyre, Charles Brewer, Miguel Jimenez, Tucker Pudwell, Byron Mitchell. You know, these were all leading up to sort of 2003, 2004 time, and he was still defending that WBO world title in the process as well. So people were giving him a bit of shit at the time for that, because of the fact that he weren't fighting some of the names that were in the super middleweight division at the time. And you got to remember, around this period of time, I think Roy Jones was still around in the super middleweight division, I think, at the time, and there was a lot of talk of maybe that fight happening at some point, and it never did. And, you know, at that period of time, obviously, as we know, he did go on to fight him later on down the line, but at this particular period of time where people will say Roy Jones was still, slightly, I'd probably say just pushing past his best that he was, but still a very big force in the division. So we never got to see that fight at that period of time. And Calzaghe, from some fans, does get a lot of shit for not taking some of them fights. And for whatever reason, these fights never happened. But, he was still beating everybody that was put in front of him. You go into 2004 and 2005, and he was beating the guys that really not a lot of people have heard of. Not a lot of people on the boxing scene had heard of these fighters at the time. So you get the casual audience, and they're thinking, I don't even really know who this guy is. But yeah, it's Calzaghe. He's looking really good. He's undefeated. He's still beating people. He's still the world champion. But we want to see him in with these big names. And I think that's where it led on to one of the most significant yet defining fights of his career in Jeff Lacy in 2006. Now, this has already been covered for the Legendary Nights series, so if you've not already heard the tale of Calzaghe versus Lacy, go and check that out. Go and find the episode on our feed for a more in-detail breakdown of this whole build-up and fight. But the Lacy fight, this was significant for his career. Probably for me, his most defining fight.
It was his most defining fight, absolutely, and as you say, he was getting criticised for the opponents that he was having to fight. You got to remember that, as you say, there were names out there, but he's always said they always wanted too much money. Obviously, he had a fear of flying, which didn't help. So he wasn't too keen to be going over to the States. So he's having to fight somebody like Mario Veep, for instance. I mean, that guy, he come over, he was 31-0, and the pressure was on Calzaghe that night, because obviously the same sort of that few months before, you had Barrera dethrone Naz, and then we had Lewis get knocked out by Ratman, and he come and done a number on him. All right, fair enough, he had a padded record, but he got rid of him. And then, I think eventually he did make that jump, and he went to Denmark, and he beat Will McIntyre on the Brian Nelson and Tyson undercard as well. So, he did make an effort of, to get over that fear of flying. I don't think he actually flew. I think what he did was he just drove to Denmark. That's just madness. But, as you say, he just wasn't getting these names. Mario Veep ended up getting himself back in a position to fight him again. So, in the end, it was just... people were obviously writing him off quite early for Jeff Lacy. He was the main man at the time. People felt that he was, they called him the mini Mike Tyson. So, for Joe Calzaghe, they didn't give him any chance whatsoever. But this was what he needed. Everybody said he needed this fight. He needed a big name. All well and good to defending your titles against these random fellas who people didn't really know too much. But, he wasn't getting any credit for it. So this guy came over to England... I say England. It was Manchester. Yes, it was Manchester, and he everybody, as I say, they just assumed that Calzaghe was going to get blasted away. There was obviously the issue with his hand. I think he fractured a part of it. I don't know if it was a fracture or a sprain. Sort of a week leading up to the fight, and he said to Enzo, his dad, he was like, "Look, do you know what? I can't fight him. My hand's just too gone." And as I said to him, look, listen to me, even you could beat this guy with one hand. He said it could be easy. Your movement, your speed is going to bamboozle him. And that's basically what he did. He had been the champion for 9 years, WBO title now. And this guy was the guy that was going to come over here and just absolutely smash his face in. And we all know that was the complete opposite, because Joe Calzaghe literally beat him for 12 rounds. I think there was only one round that was given to Lacy, and that was for a punching behind. I think it was a punch behind the head or behind the body or whatever it was, an illegal punch. So he deducted a point for him. But literally, he battered Lacy. But he didn't just batter him in this fight. He battered him for the rest of his career as well. Because after this beating, Lacy was never the same again. I think he fell into depression and he found God later on. So I mean, he literally done an absolute number on Lacy, and everybody was, no one thought it was possible, and it was just great for Joe to finally get that big name on his resume, and boy, did he deliver.
Joe Calzaghe, you were sensational tonight. You said he was made for you. Not everybody believed you. You were spot on.
Yeah, well, I can't explain how happy I am at the moment. This is a fight that me and Frank, we've been after this fight to bring out. I've already said, the better the opponent, the better I perform. You know what I mean? I have to perform against the best operators, then you see the best of Joe Calzaghe. So I think I performed well. You know, he's a world-class fighter, and I think I won every single round. You know, and I was in great shape thanks to my dad. Without him, I wouldn't be here today. He's a great trainer, great dad, love it a bit. Yeah, thanks for it. Thanks to Joe. Thanks to my little kids, Joe and Connor. See you Monday. I love you both.
Listen, you gave him a boxing lesson. You boxed his head off in there. It must have been the performance of your life.
I knew I had to box because the only chance he had was to stand toe-to-toe. I slipped up a few times, nearly Barry Mitchell fight, Charles Brewer fight. My dad told me, you're going to need to box this guy. I think I showed everybody tonight I'm a better boxer than I'm a fighter. I spoke to Barry. Barry said the same. For Frank, I had to keep on the back foot, jab, move, boxing skills. And thank God, I think I've done good.
He certainly delivered in this particular fight. This was a fantastic win. Brilliant fight this. If you've not seen this one already, please go and check it out. And then also listen to the Legendary Nights episode, The Tale of Kal-ZAH-gee versus Lacy, because I think we really enjoyed this particular fight. We really enjoyed speaking about it. Really enjoyed speaking about the win for Kal-ZAH-gee and what was probably the best career-defining performance for me of Kal-ZAH-gee's career. The fact that Lacy was billed as the mini Mike Tyson, you know, the guy that was going to come over and demolish Kal-ZAH-gee, you know, all the talk of Lacy coming in and doing a number on him, and the way Kal-ZAH-gee absolutely battered him from pillar to post for 12 rounds. It was very dominating, very dominating, and I really enjoyed this Lacy performance because I remember watching it. I remember it clear as day. I remember the undercard. We had Macronelli versus Hobson, which was a great fight. Wayne Alexander and Tommy McDonough. We even had Chad Dawson, who was 20-0 at the time, beating Jamie Hearn. So, you know, there were some great names on the undercard. A very young 3-0 Nathan Cleverly picked up a win on this card as well. Guys like Tony Quigley, David Barnes, Kerry Hope. You know, it was a great time for boxing, and especially in Manchester at this point, obviously with the Ricky Hatton band in full swing at this point in 2006. So, you know, this was great, and he came back to Manchester later on that year and beat Sakio Bika. A very awkward, unorthodox Sakio Bika, but he managed to grind out a win over Bika. And the next fight was against the former contender Peter Manfredo Jr. and it was actually one that I was there for at the Millennium Stadium. At this point in my life, I was actually still studying for a degree, and I was working for a security company, and I ended up actually going down to work for this company, and I ended up working for the main people that do all the Eddie Hearn shows, Man Security. So we ended up actually in the inner ringside of the Millennium Stadium. Ended up watching this particular fight live from ringside against Peter Manfredo Jr. when he absolutely decimated Manfredo Jr. at the Millennium Stadium. And I think this, I don't know if I'm right in saying this, I could be wrong, but I think this was maybe the first time an event like this had been held what was the Millennium Stadium at this point in time. I'm pretty sure this was the first time they'd held a boxing event there, because the undercard had guys like Takalu versus Michael Jennings and Gary Lockett versus Lee Blundell. Macronelli was on there, Bradley Price, you had Amir Khan on there, Kell Brook, Nathan Cleverly, Gavin Reese. You know, there was some great names on there, and even a 1-0 Derek Chisora at this point of his career as well. And I remember that particular card, a great win for him against Peter Manfredo Jr., who had been in the original Contender Series over in America, who had came over and got slaughtered by Joe Calzaghe in this particular one. But this then would set up what would be the final fight of his super middleweight career before he moved up, and another defining night against a 39-0 Danish warrior in Mikkel Kessler for the WBA, WBC and WBO World Super Middleweight titles.
Yeah, it's funny because obviously he had won the IBF title against Lacy as well to unify for the first time. Unfortunately, the IBF, this is how sanctioning bodies work. So they felt that this a German guy, Robert Stills, I'm not going to pronounce the guy's name, guy called Robert, he was the IBF mandatory German, and basically HBO weren't too best pleased to cover the Peter Manfredo. You know, they wanted Peter Manfredo, basically HBO, and they weren't interested in this German fella. So he was put in a position, does he fight this German guy to keep his title, or does he fight Peter Manfredo at the Millennium Stadium? With HBO also, showing coverage of the fight, and also with a chance to fight Jermaine Taylor in the summer. So that was Calzaghe's faults. Obviously, he decided to just vacate the IBF title. So that's why he didn't have the IBF title for that fight. It was just a WBO. But the Kessler, obviously, the situation was Kessler was a WBA champion at the time, and it was a second chance to fight at the Millennium Stadium. And you're 100% right. I don't recall anyone else fighting at the Millennium Stadium at that point. I think that was the first fight there in the stadium, and obviously Kessler was the second. And Kessler was undefeated. We all know Mikkel Kessler, a tough Danish fella, and he had a couple of great fights with Carl Froch later on in his career, but a really top-class fight and a top-class guy. And it was a good fight, really good fight, and it was the last one in kal-ZAH-gee's as super middleweight. And he won the ring. Actually, I think he already had the ring. He defended the ring, he defended the lineal and his WBO title, and then he won the WBC super middleweight titles as well. So it basically had all the belts back by IBF. I think, with the way the sanctioned body work, okay, he vacated the IBF, but it was a bit of the IBF champion at the time was nowhere near the standard of a Kessler or Joe Calzaghe. So rightfully so, Calzaghe was not really the undisputed, as in, he didn't have all the belts, but he really was. That made him the undisputed super middleweight, and that basically cemented his legacy as the best super middleweight in the world at that time.
But let's just take a little pause for one moment to give a shout out to the sponsors for BTR Boxing Podcast. It's Bear Attack Boxing, providing high quality boxing gloves, boxing equipment to your suitable needs. You can find them at www.bearattackboxing.co.uk and all over social media. You've got the Fight Pro 1 gloves, the Pluto gloves, the new Bear Attack Boxing t-shirt range, the inner gloves, the hand wraps, some great boxing products on there. So go and check them out. And also, we've got a little present for you. Because you're a loyal listener to BTR Boxing Podcast, we've got an exclusive discount code for you. Now, it's a 10% discount, and all you've got to do is, when you're at the checkout and you've got them boxing gloves and that t-shirt in there that you want to buy, go onto the promo code and enter BTR10 for 10% off. And 10% is not something to be scoffed at in this day and age. It can definitely get you a few quid off them high quality products that Bear Attack Boxing are selling. So, as a loyal listener to BTR Boxing Podcast, when you buy or purchase something through Bear Attack Boxing's website, in the promo code, enter BTR10 and you will get an exclusive 10% discount off your basket. So please go and take advantage of it. Follow them on social media, Bear Attack Boxing, and it's bearattackboxing.co.uk. It certainly did cement his legacy as one of the best super middleweights of all time as well, and it's a very bold statement to make, but it's a bold statement I'd stand by. Now, again, we alluded to this fact a little bit earlier, that people did slag off his earlier resume, but at this point, you got to remember he'd beat an undefeated fighter in Jeff Lacy, who was supposed to come over there and absolutely smash him to bits. That didn't happen. Then Kessler, 39-0, WBC WBA champion at the time, came over, was supposed to beat Calzaghe, younger fresher man, and Calzaghe outboxed him for 12 rounds, winning 4 rounds on 2 cards and 5 rounds on the 3rd card, cementing his legacy as one of the greatest super middleweights that Britain as a whole and Wales have ever produced. So that was great. And what else was there left for him to do? Well, obviously he moved up a weight, and this is where 2 of the biggest names of his career was on there and on his resume, and this is where people will always argue about Joe Calzaghe, about his resume and about his career, because he fought guys that were supposedly coming towards the end of their careers in his final 2 fights. So we'll move on and we'll talk about his next fight. Obviously, I think from what I remember at the time, he wanted to move up anyway. I think weight was, if I remember rightly, and people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think weight was starting to become a slight issue at this point, because his age is creeping up as well at this point. You got to remember, this guy had been around since 1993, making his debut on Lennox Lewis versus Frank Bruno, so he's getting older. What fight can he have next but Bernard Hopkins, which was a fantastic fight for him, a massive name at the time, a guy who'd been in the middleweight division and held the title for a number of years, moved up himself, been involved in some great fights fights over the years himself, was regarded as going towards the end of his career at this point, and that's something we'll touch on in a couple of moments. But you can look back on Calzaghe's career, and at this point he's 36 and Hopkins is 43, and Hopkins has obviously been in there with some absolute amazing names over his career: De La Hoya's, Jermaine Taylor's, Antonio Tava's, Ronald Winky Wright. So in the lead up to the fight with Joe Calzaghe, he fought Antonio Tava, beat him, and Ronald Winky Wright and beat him. So he'd actually had a resurgence after losing Jermaine Taylor in 2005 back to back with a split decision and a unanimous decision. And obviously Calzaghe had just finalised and cemented his legacy in the super middleweight division. Now the build up to this particular fight was quite interesting because obviously Hopkins was very brash, as we know. He still is to this day. He's mellowed a little bit in retirement, but he was a bit brash at this time, and he was giving it all the talk about how he lived a clean life, and how he'd been to prison and come out of prison and gone on to define history in the middleweight division. And one of the most controversial comments he made in the build up to this, in a little bit of a scuffle and a melee between two sort of entourages, was the fact that he was never going to let a white boy beat him. And oh my word, would them words come back to bite him on the arse when them two met in the ring.
No chance, you lost, man. You got no chance. You're a legend. You're a legend. You don't have.
I would never let a white boy beat me. I would never let a white boy beat me. I would never let a white boy beat me. I would never let a white boy beat me.
If you fight, you will lose. If you fight, you will lose.
I'd never let a white boy beat me. And you can call it any statement you want. Anybody can print that. I would never lose to a white person.
I can't wait, man. It's gonna be.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I do remember that well, and I was thinking, what an absolute prick, to be honest with you. I know Calzaghe batters him, and I didn't get to see this fight. I remember clearly because I remember staying up and listening to it on the radio. One of those fights that I just had to, I had to go back to basics, unfortunately. But I remember being quite nervous because I really wanted Calzaghe to do Hopkins, especially after putting a stupid statement out like that. And Hopkins was one of those, really. You either loved him or you didn't like him. I didn't really weren't too keen on Hopkins, although you can't deny he's a great fighter. But saying that, it didn't start very well for Calzaghe. I do remember listening in. I remember him getting put down, and I do remember the commentators sort of saying it might have even been Costello. I can't remember, but sort of saying it was a bit of a flash knockdown, and it was a bit of it was a slow start really. Obviously with the knockdown, and he couldn't really get going. He was a really awkward Hopkins, and as anyone knows. So those first sort of 4 rounds from sort of what I was listening to, and obviously I went back and watched it sort of a couple of weeks later. And it took a while for him to get, but when he did, he was reading those right hand Hopkins, and he was moving well, and just controlled that fight and sort of smashed Hopkins really for the rest of the fight for me. And I thought he won it quite convincingly. 2 of the judges had it quite convincingly, and one judge, which I'm sure we'll all know and remember, was Adelaide Bird.
No, Adelaide Bird, notorious as ever back in 2008, giving an absolute shite scorecard as always. But going back to this Hopkins fight then, yeah, obviously I remember it getting him, he got knocked down early in the fight, he got caught cold with a punch coming in, and obviously that was it then. He had a bit of an uphill struggle from there because, we know that he was fighting an American fighter over in Las Vegas. The odds are stacked against him really a little bit at this point, but then he come back and put on a really, really good display. I also remember the point when he got him into the to the corner, and he sort of pushed him or forced him into the corner, and he sort of did like a little bit of a gyrating on his arse, didn't he? And just sort of taking the piss a little bit out of Hopkins, and it was great. It was great to look back on. Even now, it still makes me laugh. And I remember watching it after o'clock in the morning, thinking, yes, you go on, Joe, you go and show that absolute arsehole, that guy who's bringing race into the equation. I mean, I'm not being funny, but if this was said in 2019 now, if he would have said, I'll never let a white boy beat him, if that would have been said the other way around, if that would have been Calzaghe saying, I would never let a black man beat me, there would have been riots, there would have been all sorts of media outlets covering this, talking about racism and all sorts. But, this got left under the radar a little bit because it was completely different. So, that kind of brought a little spite and a little needle into this particular fight. But then obviously Hopkins went on to pick pick up a title later on down the line by beating Kelly Pavlik. So actually this win made it more defining in Joe's career because of what Hopkins went on to do. You look at what Hopkins did after he lost to Joe Calzaghe, and he went and beat Kelly Pavlik. He then went on and beat Roy Jones Jr. He then got a draw and then a victory over Jean Pascal to win the WBC, the IBO and the vacant WBC Diamond lighter heavyweight titles in there. So think about it like that. This is a guy who went on to do some amazing things in the sport. He went on and beat Bebiut Shumanov and won the WBA, IBF and IBA light heavyweight titles. So I'm not being funny. Like, people talk about this win with Calzaghe over Hopkins as, oh, it was a close fight, you know, it could have gone either way and blah blah blah, but I'm not being funny. This win was very significant in his career. People say he was cherry picking fighters who were old and who were at the end of the career, but to me this win was even more significant, going for what Hopkins went on to do in his career. And then he got to his final fight of his career, which was a shame really that we're going to talk about this as his final fight, because I would have loved to have seen him carry on just for maybe one more year longer, and maybe that fantasy fight with Froch would have happened if he would have been around for another year. But the Roy Jones Jr. fight was something he always wanted. This was something that should have happened around about the 2000-2001 mark. It never did, and they both admitted they wanted the fight. They eventually got it on in November 2008, and again, Joe Calzaghe's down early on, getting caught cold off Roy Jones Jr.
Calzaghe knows that Jones is quicker in the center of the ring, and down goes Calzaghe. Just as he was down in the first round against Hopkins, he's down in the first round against Jones. And Jones makes his point that he can hurt Calzaghe in flurries inside.
But he may not make it out of this one like he did with the Hopkins.
Right. He's much more hurt.
He's seriously hurt. The other one's more of a flash knockdown.
Much more badly hurt than against Hopkins. And fighting rather than trying to get away. Calzaghe's going to take the chance that he can keep fighting with Jones after taking a big shot. And he goes forward, wading in. But Jones is going to have a 10-8 round with which to begin the fight.
Yeah, once again he's put down. Yeah, pretty similar, wasn't it, to the Hopkins fight in terms of, you know, he was just up against it from the off. But you know, it was a good fight. I mean, there were close rounds which followed the knockdown, but Calzaghe did take control of the fight, and sort of in the eighth round, I think Jones, he got cut on his eye. But it was, for me, it was pretty easy night's work in the end for Joe Calzaghe, and he proved he spread that, you know, his hands so fast. I mean, that's the one thing with Joe. I think at this point as well is that, you know, in terms of sparring, he wasn't able to spar. I think they used to just do intensive sparring like a couple of weeks or so. 3 weeks before the fight, he just, you know, his hands were just shot. He just couldn't hit hard enough, and hence the reason they had the early knockouts. And then later on, he wasn't able to get rid of guys as easily as he was able to. Like you said, he weren't able to load up on them shots. But so, you know, it was another significant scalp. You know, at the end of the day, Kessler and Lacy are obviously the two big ones, because obviously, you know, they were undefeated. They were big names, and they were touted to be superstars. And Kessler did go on to become a champion, and he's right. You know, I think it would be right to say that he is considered to be a very, very good fighter. Maybe not a complete great, but what he did achieve excellent things after he lost to Calzaghe. But I mean, the one thing I did like was I think the best win and the best victory on Calzaghe's resume was the cult battle with Frank Warren. Now, I know, you know my general consensus on these promoters. I'm not keen on promoters as it is. I don't tend to like them because I just think they're money grabbing pieces of shit. Look, and when I do say that, I do mean the big promoters. I'm not talking about the ones on the lower cards, because those guys do a lot for these up and coming fighters. They're not all in it for the money, but when it comes to these lot, it absolutely is. Because Calzaghe, after the Hopkins fight, he ended up splitting with Frank Warren in June 2008, and he wanted to promote himself. So Frank Warren, you know, rather than just let the guy go. He decided to put a court case against kal-ZAH-gee, claiming that a verbal promise to promote the Roy Jones Jr. fight was broken and that kal-ZAH-gee actually owed him $1.4 million. This is where it says dollars, so obviously not quids. But kal-ZAH-gee in turn claimed that Warren owed him past fees. So in March 2009, the High Court ruled that Warren had persuaded kal-ZAH-gee to sign contracts under duress when kal-ZAH-gee was hungry and dehydrated preparing for matches, and that Warren's company, Sports Network Limited, actually owed Joe kal-ZAH-gee $2.8 million in unpaid fees. And I was well happy with it. Do you know what? I knew they went to court. I didn't realise he got $2.8 million for it, and I think that is probably one of the best victories on kal-ZAH-gee's record, because I can't stand it when these promoters do things with their fighters. You know, so in the past from someone like kal-ZAH-gee and through other fights throughout the years, and they go and take him to court over it just doesn't seem right, and I think it's ridiculous. But so yeah, I thought that was a great win for Joe.
It was a great win for Joe, definitely. You know, it's as you say, not going too all promoter-ish on it and slighting him, but I totally agree with what you said about promoters, 100%. But Joe's career ended with a victory, and a dominating victory, after a rocky start against Roy Jones Jr., and obviously his hands were shot to shit at this point. He could have stayed on for another year. We could have had fantasy fights with guys like Carl Froch, who was just coming into his own in December of 2008 when he beat Jean Pascal for the WBC super middleweight title. We could have seen that. We would love to have seen that. But Joe made the right decision for this point in his career. He decided to retire undefeated with 46 wins and no losses, becoming one of only 15 world champions who was undefeated as a world champion. These were guys like Floyd Mayweather, Rocky Marciano, Andre Ward, Terry Marsh, Harry Simon, Jimmy Barry, Ricardo Lopez in there. You've got Sven Otkert, Dimitri Pirog. We've got all these guys that, you know, some of them are no longer with us, of course, but some of them, you know, are still with us and are still active in the boxing scene in some capacity. So to have his name etched in stone against guys like these, you know, is amazing. And it's an amazing achievement. And BoxRec is obviously the Bible of boxing for a lot of us these days. You know, everyone goes into BoxRec to check out rankings, to check out upcoming fights. BoxRec actually have kal-ZAH-gee as the best super middleweight of all time, which, you know, I wouldn't argue too much with. I'm sure there'll be a lot of debate and subjectiveness over, but in terms of what we've produced over in Britain, you know, as a whole, not just thinking about just Wales individually, but in Britain as a whole, he's probably one of the, if not the best super middleweight we ever had. People will argue there's Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank, of course, but you know, kal-ZAH-gee kind of, if he's not at the top, he's in the top 3 for people, definitely. And what he achieved in his career was amazing. You know, he held that WBO title for 10 years. Let's not forget that. He held that title for 10 years, making 21 successful defences, the most in super middleweight history before his move to light heavyweight. So, for me, what he achieved in the sport is amazing. Even his peers in boxing, guys like Ricky Hatton, said Joe kal-ZAH-gee is the best fighter Britain has ever produced. And when you've got your counterparts saying stuff like that about you, you know, that says it all, really. And then a few years ago, he ended up getting inducted into the Boxing Hall of Fame in what was an emotional time for him and his dad Enzo, in an emotional interview which they had with, I believe it was Sky at the time. And, you know, the sort of upset and emotion you could see on both of them at the time was amazing to see. And, you know, God rest his soul, Enzo kal-ZAH-gee passed away last year, and, you know, he was the guy that for me made Joe's career. He was there with him from day one till the very end of his career, and some say that relationship when it's father and son is very difficult and very hard to manage. And you know, it's evident in interviews that they had that there was always times where they clashed and there was always times when they had issues, but ultimately Enzo kal-ZAH-gee knew his son and Joe kal-ZAH-gee trusted in his dad.
He did. I mean, they had a wonderful relationship, and as you say, the father-son relationship doesn't always work out as you know, it tends to, you know, there's always going to be problems at some point, and I think through the years and through history that, you know, that's inevitable, that they don't always work. But this one in particular, I think that it did blossom. I mean, Enzo was, again, I mean, I think that's where Joe was slightly criticised as well, because Enzo didn't have that boxing background as such. He had a love for the sport, but he wasn't really a fighter, was he? So, but you know, he went on to coach other champions in Enzo Machinelli, didn't he? I think that it was his training when he went and won a world title. So, you know, he was able to do other stuff as well. So, and that was great. And obviously, yeah, his passing sad. I mean, that was terrible. That only happened last year. It feels like last week, really. It doesn't seem like a year ago, to be honest. But, you know, as you say, is he the best super middleweight? It's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, there are some fantastic super middleweights there that you could throw in the mix. He's definitely in and around there. I mean, Boxing News, the 1909 Boxing News, they ranked kal-ZAH-gee at number 8 in their 100 greatest British boxers, the ultimate guide of all time. So, you know, he sits in the top 10 as the best British boxer of all time. You know what? I can't really argue against it. I mean, I obviously went on one there with the old promoter with Frank Warren, but it's interesting that as soon as he meets Frank Warren, that pretty much he gets the Jones fight. You know, I think a lot of the fights, a lot of the fighters he did fight were former world champions, and he fought them afterwards. So it was always, you know, it was never. Why didn't they fight them when they were world champions? You know what I mean? It was something not quite right, and I don't think it was because he was avoiding them. I don't think fighters do. I think that's where we get a little bit blurred with it, because I honestly don't believe fighters will avoid other fighters. I just think that they're fighters, and it's in their nature. They want to fight the best. And I think it's a lot to do with promoters. It's a lot to do with money. And it's a lot to do with TV companies. And they're the problem. It's not the fighters at the end of the day. And I don't think kal-ZAH-gee ducked anybody. And I think, rightly so, he should be in the top 10 as the greatest ever British boxers. And I'm with that. I can't really take him out there. And I think he does feature above Eubank and Ben. I think his hands speedy and when his hands weren't shot, I think he beats them both, to be honest with you. That's just my opinion, and I think that he gets unfair criticism. So for me, he's definitely one of the best we've produced, and you know, it was great to watch his career and blossom into the super middleweight champion, undisputed. Whether he had the IBF or not, he was undisputed in my eyes, and obviously go on to get those two marquee names at the end of his career.
Such a massive deal that went to the States. I think there's always going to be doubters there that he never come over to America, you know. He beat those, but he haven't come to the States. So I agree with that. And I wanted to go to America and fight. I wanted to go to the States. So I went there not just once, but twice. I beat two of their greatest and fought two good fights out there. And I think I showed balls. I always try to give my best. I always want fans, like people say, how do you want to be remembered? But listen, I always fought the best I could fight at the time. And also, I always fought my heart out. I always tried to entertain, sometimes too much. I always tried to entertain and give the fans what they want to see, you know. And now, you know, what can I say? You know, being inducted in the International Boxing Hall of Fame in 2014, first ballot with Oscar De La Hoya and Felix Trinidad. Wow, two amazing greats. I think to me that shows the respect I have. But the boxing writers voted me in there on the first ballot. So would I be in there if I didn't go to America? Possibly not yet. But yeah, I think I'm satisfied. I think I have a lot of respect of the fighters there, and also of the public and the journalists. I'm going to America, going to the States and fighting, but not just once, but twice. And like you said again, winning.
Yeah, and I can't echo anything that you've said enough, really, because I agree with it. And although people might listen to this from different countries, USA, Canada, all the different countries that listen to us, you know, we really appreciate that support. You might feel we're being a little bit biased towards kal-ZAH-gee, but I don't believe we are. I believe we're doing it based on factual information. I believe what he achieved in his career, practically unifying the super middleweight division and practically going up to the light heavyweight division and beating two of the best names that I've ever graced the squared circle. Yeah, you know, people might say Roy Jones was past his best, it should have happened earlier. Yeah, we know it should have done, but it didn't. Nothing we can do can change that. But at least kal-ZAH-gee had the balls to go in there and at least put himself on the line to try and get these fights. One of the things he said in interviews, there's an interview in particular that sticks out in mind, and the interviewer asked about one of his biggest regrets. Does he have any regrets in boxing? And his line was, yeah, I wasn't born early enough. And what he was meaning by that is he would love to have been born a little bit earlier, to have been around in the era of Collins, Eubank and Ben, and that's sort of where he wanted to be. If he would have had the opportunity to fight them guys and their primes, he would have done. And he's openly said that on numerous occasions. He wanted to fight Roy Jones in his prime. He would have loved that. Whether he would have won that, remains to be seen. We will never know that now. He would have fought any of these guys in his prime. He never backed away from a fight. He was always confident in his ability. His dad would always come up with a great game plan, no matter who the opponent was, to try and outsmart him. And I think you've got to give him credit where credit is due. He retired 46-0. He got out of the game at the right time. He retired by becoming practically the undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. He won every title in the super middleweight division anyway. He might have not held them all at the same time, but he won every title in the super middleweight division. He then moved up. He won the ring light heavyweight title and retained that title, and then retired. And for me, one of the greatest British boxers that I've ever graced the squared circle. Yeah, one of the greatest super middleweights that I've ever graced the squared circle as well. And I've really enjoyed sitting down to break down some of the more significant moments of his career, his early days, his amateur career, what he's done in his career, some of the significant fights that have led on to these conversations. And I think it's been an enjoyable episode and very surprising to come out on top of the poll, as I said at the start of the episode, given who was in there with him: the Hagglers, the Whitakers, the Pacquiaos. You know, people obviously that voted for him. They must have been all Welsh fans, of course, but you know, maybe they just seen it as what we've broke down in this episode. They've seen it as, well, look what he actually achieved in his career. You know, multiple weight world champion. You know, practically unified super middleweight. One of the great British boxers, best British boxers ever of all time. So you know, people voted for him for a particular reason, and you know, I've really enjoyed this episode, and I know yourself, Johnston, you've really enjoyed breaking down the career of Joe Calzaghe too.
Absolutely. As I say, he was. I think he was always right. I think you're right in terms of that. That was a great way of putting it, that he wish he was born earlier. Because I do remember him saying that he'd get goosebumps watching Ben and Eubank and Collins and Watson. He used to love watching the fights, and he really would love. He couldn't wait as a kid to get involved and be a part of that. And I do believe that, honestly do. I think that a lot, you know, missing out in the Olympics, they didn't quite get the exposure that Robin Reid did early in his career. You know, he just sort of missed the boat just ever so slightly in his era, and in terms of not quite going right for him, like with being the amateurs and then this. Because if he had gone on to go to the 92 Olympics, I think that could have really pushed him on. And because we've been Olympian, you know, that tends to happen. We see it with Joshua, and we see it with the Gal and Grove, for instance, which is probably a perfect example. The Gal was shot on and Grove wasn't, and Calzaghe was a bit like that. And then he had to fight to get himself in position, and his hands at the time, I mean, watching back on some of the videos, his hands are unbelievable. People talk about Khan, how fast he was. For a super middleweight, Calzaghe was just relentless with fast hands. He went and mix it to the head and the body, and I just think that certain super middleweights at the time when they were watching, they were like, nah, I'm not. I don't even want to get involved in that. And Chris Eubank with the nail on the edge. You know, after Chris Eubank was over the hill a little bit, he was over the hill. But, you know, he even said he could see why no one wanted to fight him, because this kid was good, and he would have fitted in that era. Whether he would have beat him or not, I mean, I'm sort of saying he would have. We just don't know, do you? I mean, they were all great fighters in their own rights, and they all had something different. But 100%, Calzaghe deserved a career profile breakdown by ourselves, Sheldon. It was a good pick, albeit I had him as the fourth best southpaw of all time. But as you know, as the greatest British boxers, he could quite easily slot in the top 10 for me.
100% agree with you. So, if you've enjoyed listening to this episode of Career Profiles, profiling the career of the Welsh wizard Joe Calzaghe, please let us know on social media at BTR Boxing Pod on Twitter and BTR Boxing Podcast on Facebook as well. If you've not already subscribed to the podcast, you can do that by checking us out on Apple Podcasts. Please go on there, subscribe, listen to a few episodes, and then give us a rating and a review, because it really helps boost us up the Apple Podcast rankings, and we get more exposure, and as a result more people get to hear all the different series we run. If you're not on Apple, then please go over and use any available app on Android from the Google Play Store. You can use Castbox, Spreaker, Stitcher, Player FM, Spotify, even TuneIn. If you use YouTube and you want to listen to us through there, we're on Eat Sleep Boxing Repeats YouTube channel as well. So go and check us out. Let us know what you think about the career profiles. Give us your feedback. Let us know if there's any others in particular that you would love to see. But in the meantime, we will be putting polls out on a weekly basis for some of the best fighters of all time, career profiling them, sitting down to discuss their careers in detail detail. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and we'll see you on the next episode of Career Profiles.
Every kid's right, they got a sport, and Joe wanted to be a soccer player. And being I'm from Sardinia, you know, Joyous place, right? I brought up in Sardinia, but obviously I brought up in Bedford as well, actually Bedford. And football was my dream, always dreamed football. So in any case, Joe wanted to be a soccer player. But one particular day, they didn't pick him in school, right? For some reason or another, we don't know, probably biased, right? After Joe came back home crying, Dad, you never picked me, never picked me. So I thought to myself, okay, I had a cushion, big cupboard where it is in the house. So I bought him a punch bag, like this floor ceiling one. Joe said, start punching it, learn a bit of punching it. And he really enjoyed it. A funny thing about it, that we were in the new estates camp in another site, and down about half a mile, there was actually a gym. That's a fluke. Absolutely, just built out of the estate. And there's down the road, there was a boxing club. So obviously I took him to a boxing club, and he loved it. He loved it. I thought, bloody hell, brilliant. So from there onwards, obviously, he grew up to 8, 9, 10, and started enjoying the boxing there, right? And the story becomes then. He started winning ABA champions, ABA titles, ABA titles. Everyone is saying already, this guy is going to be a superstar. He only needs common sense about it. But obviously, I was linked with him, because obviously I'm his father. But I like the training method. I learned more or less my training method. And today, as you can go on and talk as why and why, he created this guy with a special type boxer. They're not boasting, the world knows about it, right? And I myself never trained him myself. I was not a trainer. As I come from nowhere, I didn't know nothing about boxing. I was a soccer player, a musician, actually I was a musician. For some reason, it gelled together because obviously what I visualised is a style of different boxing, which obviously me and Joe happened to be gelled well, and everybody enjoyed that style. But in any case, for us, it's very successful. And to this very day, that style remains unique. And obviously, we created and defeated Joe Kæl'zæɡi. Simple as that.